They say if you love someone, it's best to set them free, and maybe that's what the White Sox had to do with Andrew Vaughn.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half and covering the team well before then. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. And two recent pieces have come out about Andrew Vaughn being dealt away that I want to react to in the first segment. Then let's discuss just how far the White Sox are from bouncing back toward being competitive compared to other teams that didn't make the playoffs. And finally, it's Fan Poll Friday. So I know I'm going back to the Andrew Vaughn well again, but the Chicago Sun-Times and SouthsideSox.com, who I now write for, had two interesting pieces on Andrew Vaughn being traded to the Brewers that I felt I had to tackle. We're in the offseason. The playoffs are going on. Andrew Vaughn obviously made headlines when he hit that 3-run homer in Game 2. And now the Brewers and Cubs are going to battle it out over the weekend to see who advances to the NLCS. And I was like, you know what? These two new recent pieces, I really want to tackle. So I apologize if I'm just going over something that I already went over on Tuesday, but there's new information that I felt like, hey, I want to share with you. As again, I want to entertain you, I want to challenge you, and I want to inform you. So the SouthsideSox.com piece from Hannah Filippo, I like because she came at it from the organization, finally realizing it was just not worth continuing to sink time and effort to see if he could finally reach his potential. And then Kyle Williams, his piece in the Sun-Times, I liked because, he basically points out it's probably likely never going to happen that Vaughn would become this folk hero version that we're seeing in Milwaukee, that it would happen in Chicago. It just probably was not going to happen based on what they were asking him to do, where Milwaukee, they're asking him to do something completely different. And when I share some of the comments of Williams' work, I also wonder if it was because Vaughn why he floundered in Chicago was just because he couldn't shake off the dysfunction of the White Sox past leadership. And maybe he just couldn't get past that. Hey, things are changing. And I've had Kyle on the show saying, yeah, things are changing in the clubhouse. It's a lot different. Things are much different with Will Venable running things in the clubhouse than Pedro Gafal. And I also wonder if it took, Vaughn getting traded to finally realize, hey, something needs to change beyond, I'll just eventually hit because I've always hit. Because that is what he once said to John Triffin when asked by the team's beleaguered television play-by-play voice, are you worried about the season, getting off to a slump? And he was like, no, I always hit. I'm fine. Maybe he had to be humbled because there were those rumblings that Andrew Vaughn didn't work as hard as maybe he should have. That type of stuff. And getting given up by an organization, maybe realize, woke him up to realize, hey, I can't get by on just a hot hitting June and a decent August and September to keep my numbers at replacement level, because that's basically what it was. He was very good at being a mirage in Chicago. So here's some nuggets from Williams' piece that I want to share. And again, make sure to get a subscription to the Sun-Times to support some local journalism. Or the nice thing about the Sun-Times, you don't have to subscribe, but they do ask for a donation. So feel free to also drop a donation. So here's the nuggets I want to share. No one could have expected that former White Sox first baseman Andrew Vaughn would be making an impact in the playoffs. He hit 189, 218, 314 in his first 48 games and was sent to AAA Charlotte. Then he struggled with the Knights before being traded to the Brewers in June for Aaron Savali. In 2024, Vaughn was playing on a 121-loss team. Now he finds himself contributing in the National League Division Series with Milwaukee, which finished with the best record in the majors, 97-65. The series is tied 2-2 ahead of a win-or-go-home Game 5 at American Family Field. Quote, the beginning of the year definitely wasn't how I wanted it to be, Vaughn said. Definitely a really tough part of my career, end quote. Vaughn was able to revive his career with the Brewers, who have a history of getting the best out of their players. He reported in Nashville, the Brewers' AAA affiliate, and had immediate success, batting .259, .338, .550. The fresh start was refreshing. Quote, the game humbled him, end quote, Brewers manager Pat Murphy said of Vaughn's struggles. Vaughn still wasn't on the organization's radar for a major league call-up, but an opportunity opened up when first baseman Rhys Hoskins injured a thumb, and Vaughn took advantage, hitting a 3-run homer in his July 7th debut against the Dodgers. And then I'm going to just skip ahead. The looseness of the clubhouse and the relative anonymity he can enjoy with the Brewers have allowed Vaughn to assimilate quickly. He's not leaned on like he was with the Sox. Quote, for Vaughn to find his way here and reinvent himself is just awesome to see, right-hander Eric Fetty told the Sun-Times. I got to see the whole thing from one side to another, and I'm just really happy for him, end quote. Like Vaughn, Fetty was a first-round pick by the Nationals. His struggles led him to pitch in the Korean baseball organization, where he fine-tuned his game. He returned to the majors with the Sox in 2024. Quote, sometimes just getting a fresh set of eyes or just a feeling of a fresh start can do a lot for your confidence, end quote, Fetty said. So there it is. Basically, you got a manager of the year saying, yeah, kind of had to be humbled. And you also see in Williams' reporting, not being counted on to be a big bat has actually helped him revive his career in Milwaukee. And to me, in a lot of ways, that actually absolves the White Sox. Except for maybe they should have not drafted a guy that couldn't handle being a big bat, because unlike some other players finding success away from the South Side, you got to give Chicago credit. They tried everything they could after 2022 to have him live up to his number 3 pick billing. They let legend Jose Abreu walk away for nothing so Vaughn could play first. They never once considered demoting him in 2024 when he was struggling mightily. And it was one of the many, many reasons the team lost 121 games. Wasn't the reason, but it was a contributing factor. Then they paid him $5.8 million despite a shoestring budget after another replacement level 2024 season. And they gave him opportunity after opportunity to work out of his April and May funk, and it just never happened. About the only thing I think you can criticize the White Sox for was maybe not trying to make the swing change that the Brewers did. However, if I'm reading through the lines, I'm not sure Vaughn would have made the change, as he always believed he could hit. And I'm not sure, because the White Sox, for their credit, probably would have identified the swing change. They changed Miguel Vargas's swing. So, it just, to me, he kind of believed he was always going to hit. So, they kind of just had to let him go. They couldn't keep sinking their time in. And that's why I like how Hannah Filippo, of SouthsideSox.com, pointed out that he just became a sunk cost. And this is what she writes on SouthsideSox.com. The Sox learned the sunk cost fallacy isn't fictitious with the one and only Andrew Vaughn. The number 3 overall pick in 2019 hit below the Mendoza line, posted a minus 1.8 B-WAR in Chicago before being demoted to AAA. Vaughn's hitting slightly improved in Charlotte, but he still wasn't swinging like a starting first baseman should. Instead of expending more time and investment into his improvement, the Sox finally exchanged him for Brewer starter Aaron Civale in June, pulling the plug on a 6-year project that fell well below par. As difficult as it was, the Sox made the right decision. Civale wasn't an ace, but he 8 innings and prevented young arms from being overtaxed before August. For a team that put 3 starting pitchers on the 60-day IL before May, any rotation help was helpful. The Sox couldn't have developed their own first-round pick, which is an indictment on them and not Vaughn, but at least they identified a player who could help the team in some capacity. No one could have predicted how much better Vaughn would have hit in Milwaukee, but he was never going to hit like that he is now if he stayed on the South Side. And there it is. I mean, they at least got a guy to the big leagues, but he was supposed to be a foundational player, and it just never happened. And, the relative anonymity now in Milwaukee, you can see he's much more comfortable. That's why it would not surprise me that he becomes a decent player next year, too, for Milwaukee. And that's fine. But there's only so much we can rip the White Sox on. And what it is they followed terrible process in 2019, but that management staff is gone. Those guys aren't making the draft picks anymore. What you just got to hope for is that this current administration doesn't make the same mistakes. And the hope is this rebuild also fix a lot of other organizational issues. And let's discuss just how far off Chicago is compared to their fellow peers in bad in getting back to being competitive. And let's discuss that after the break. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays. You can try player props. You can even follow the live lines during the games. And I've always been saying, FanDuel's traditional money lines, over-unders, and the spreads, they are fun to play. But if you want to win big money, or at least double or triple your cash, play the parlays, the props, or the futures. For example, if you think Rome Odunze is going to score 2 or more touchdowns, that is at plus 1,000. So if that happens on Monday night and you put, say, $10 on that, you could win $100. Think he's going to score the first touchdown. That is at plus 410. So if you want to put down even, again, $10 on that, you could at least quadruple your money because you could win up to $41. FanDuel makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the, riding on the game there. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe at wherever you get your podcasts. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. And also make sure to check out my written content at SouthsideSox.com, on TapSportsNet.com, and at Fans First Sports Network. Sorry there, got a little, something gets in your throat. You're like, I'm Peter Brady here. All right, so I know I've panned the Athletics' Jim Bowden before on this show. I know I've been pretty critical of his work. And, one thing is clear. You can tell why no team has ever given him a job since he flamed out with the Reds and the Nationals as their general manager. And I think also another thing is clear is Rick Hahn is probably following his path after auditioning with MLB Network during the trade deadline. Because I don't see Hahn getting another job after the spectacular failure that happened in Chicago. Now, it doesn't mean he was a terrible, terrible baseball man. He could make pretty good trades to get prospects. He just, couldn't reel in, Nick Hostetler, and also just could never take the reins and say, I'm in charge, because he'd always say, well, Kenny's my boss. Yeah, Kenny was your boss on paper. Come on, man. We all know Kenny kicked himself upstairs and to do a little bit less work. That's all it was. He was supposed to be in charge, and all that dysfunction and all that stuff. And also Rick Hahn could have really gained the respect of the baseball world, even though I know there's only 30 of those jobs, but by saying, you want to hire Tony La Russa, I'm out then. I'm not sticking around to see him destroy this team I built. Even though, again, turns out it was a poorly constructed team. But that's why I think, Rick's a smart guy. He's more well-spoken. I think he would do a better job than Jim Bowden, though, when it comes to like writing or covering teams. But I think Bowden deserves some credit for ranking the 18 teams that didn't make the playoffs in terms of their ability to contend in 2026, which he has out on The Athletic. Just a thought exercise, though. I give him credit for at least, hey, I'll tackle this because great. You ranked the Astros as number one because they were the first team that missed out on the playoffs. Although he did rank the Marlins pretty high, but again, they finished 4 games under 500. But I do want to discuss where he put the White Sox fellow peers in bad. In terms of the teams that lost 90 games or more. Those are definitely peers of just being terrible. They were out of the race opening day for most of these guys. So kind of want to tackle where he put the White Sox relative to the Angels, the Nationals, Twins, Pirates, and Rockies. And he only has the White Sox ahead of the Angels and the Rockies. And honestly, I don't think he's reading the room when it comes to the Twins. And I think he's overvaluing Paul Skeens' impact on the Pirates. And his suggestion that, Pirates can just spend some money in the offseason on the offense and they could become a surprise contender is laughable. Because if there's one team that actually spends even less money, it's the Pirates. And the only difference is the Pirates actually gave out a $100 million contract. But otherwise, their fans are just as frustrated with their owners us White Sox fans are with ours. Although having Paul Skeens and the rotation that they do have, especially being so young, does give the Pirates a chance to move ahead of the White Sox in terms of possibly being competitive sooner. So I got no qualms with the theory that the Pirates are ahead of the White Sox in his rankings. And he has the White Sox at 16th, by the way. But I would have put the Sox ahead of the Twins, which he has at 15th. and the Angels and the Rockies, because I think the Twins are actually in sell-off mode in the offseason. Not what Bowden writes about the Twins. Here's what he writes. The Twins traded team leader Carlos Correa to the Astros at the trade deadline and then dealt basically their entire bullpen to kick off their rebuild by bolstering their farm system. Then earlier this week, they fired manager Rocco Baldelli. When healthy, the Twins have a solid top of the rotation led by Joe Ryan and Pablo Lopez, and they hope that rookie Mick Abel, whom they acquired from the Phillies at the deadline in the Johan Duran trade, will develop into another reliable starter. On offense, they can continue to count on the off-injured Byron Buxton and Royce Lewis. Both played more than 100 games in 2025, and rookie Luke Keeschel had an exciting albeit injury-plagued season. The good news is their farm system ranks among the top 5 in the game, according to most analysts. Wait a minute. You just mentioned they can continue to count on oft-injured Byron Buxton and Royce Lewis. Wow, they played 100 games. So did Luis Robert Jr. and Luke Keeschel. Again, I mean, the Twins, yeah, if they stay healthy, they've got 3 guys. But I don't see Joe Ryan being on this team next year. At least if the Twins are smart. If they're smart, they trade Joe Ryan in the offseason and try to get the same return the White Sox got for Garrett Crochet to help, accelerate their rebuilding timeline. Basically, wipe the slate clean and use one of the best systems in baseball to rebuild a competitive team by getting the guys who are ready to contribute at the majors up in 2026 to get that big league experience to validate, are they core pieces? Kind of like what the White Sox did in 2025. The Twins should be doing what the White Sox did this season for next year. And I think they're trending that way. And that is why I think, I put the White Sox just a step ahead of the Twins because they're a year ahead with their rebuild. They have laid the foundation. Now they're on to phase 2 of the internal improvement, and you're adding some more studs in the 2026 draft to your system. So I think the White Sox have a legit shot to move ahead of the Twins if they make a few minor upgrades and if the Twins do trade Joe Ryan. Otherwise, yeah, there's a possibility that they'll be battling it out for the cellar. But I do think both have the opportunity to duke it out for the division at the end of the decade if all goes to chalk for both the White Sox and the Twins. And I do think the Sox could get there just a bit faster. But, that is a 2 teams to keep an eye on to take over the division at the end of the decade. And if you're wondering, what did Bowden say about the White Sox? Here's what he wrote. The White Sox took a small step forward this year, improving their win total from 41 to 60. They promoted 2 players they hope will be cornerstones of the rebuild, catcher Kyle Teal and shortstop Colson Montgomery, and saw development from their young starting pitchers like Shane Smith, Sean Burke, and Davis Martin. Their farm system showed mixed results this season, as top prospect Brandon Montgomery had a solid season, as did 2024 second-round pick Caleb Bonnemer, but top pitching prospects Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz both had disappointing seasons. Their 2025 top pick, Billy Carlson, was one of the top high school talents in this year's class. Despite acquiring several young players in trades over the past year, their farm system still ranks in the bottom third. However, they have a long way to go before they become relevant again. Like I said, I can make the same case for the Twins if he's thinking that, because, yeah, they got the 5th best system, but some of their guys still need this thing called experience. And, Jim, if I do my math correctly, being ranked 17th per MLB pipeline is actually middle third. Now, if he's going off Kylie McDaniel, from ESPN, yes, he did rank the White Sox farm system 20th, and I think Fangraphs also has the White Sox in the 3rd. But still, it's up and down. But how about adding some context that the team does have 5 top 100 prospects to work with? And if you're concerned a bottom 3rd ranking means they don't have a system to make secondary trades to put them over the top, that's a different story. But the eye test in the minor league system shows they still have some guys that they could call up that can actually raise the team's talent floor. But hey, Jim never believed in a raised talent floor. He never believed in that. That's why he made terrible trades all the time. And that's why he's no longer working for a big league team. Anyways, he obviously got it right putting the Nationals ahead of the White Sox at 14. The Angels being at 17 and the Rockies at 18 are correct, as they are staring into a dark abyss of a future. Well, on Fridays, I'm trying to roll out a Fan Poll Friday segment, so let's discuss the 3 I ran during the week, and that is coming up after the break. What do you get when you have a bald eagle standing on top of a silverback gorilla riding a T-Rex? Confidence, pure confidence. If you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiette Go Long. That's exactly where Rougiette Go Long comes in, this isn't just another ED pill. It's a total game changer for confidence. Go Long combines 2 doctor-trusted medications in 1 dual-action formula, so you can get hard and go the distance. The effects can last up to 36 hours. That's confidence all day, all night, and even into the next day. And the process is simple. Connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online, and if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly right to your door. And hey, your neighbors don't need to know your confidence secrets. But if they ask, hey, we've been hearing something that sounds like a bald eagle standing on top of a silverback gorilla riding a T-Rex, you can tell them no, 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 no. What you're hearing is the confidence that comes from Rugiet Go Long. Ready to level up your confidence in the bedroom? Head to rugiet.com. That's rugiet.com and use promo code LOCKEDONMLB for 15% off your first order. That's rugiet.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Make sure you use our code so they know we sent you. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts. This show's available on all major podcast platforms. Hope you have some fun weekend plans coming up. Mine, I think it's just, again, low-key, running my daughter to ballet stuff, that type of stuff. All right, I ran 3 polls on our YouTube channel, on the community page. One was regarding Mike Toddman's future on the team, then the team's top priority in the offseason. And if you had to pick between supporting the Cubs and the Brewers, which one would it be? And your guys' response was, it was a tight one. Now, I agree with you on keeping Talkman and backing the Brewers over the Cubs, which was the winning vote getter, but by a very slim margin. But I do disagree with the offseason priority, and I did a show about it. But in terms of Talkman's future, and I've got the results up for those watching on YouTube, basically just asked, what do you think the White Sox should do with Mike Talkman? 55% of you said tender Talkman. 22% voted trade him for prospects. 16% voted non-tender, but try to re-sign him for less. And 7% voted let him go. And again, I'm just reading out the results for those that are listening on Apple or Spotify. Now, the trade for prospects, I'm not sure what you could get considering his legs are starting to go. He doesn't hit double-digit home runs. He's basically, at this point, either a perfect bridge player if you have a prospect like the White Sox have, in the wings, but just needs a little bit more seasoning, or if you're looking for a 4th outfielder. But I also, and those guys really don't go for a ton. I mean, you could get a Gage Zeal type prospect, kind of like what the White Sox got for Austin Slater. But also I don't know if it's going to happen because, he kind of did request not to be traded at the deadline, and Chris Getz, acquiesced. And I'm not sure the GM would suddenly want to reverse course and not do right by a player. I think sometimes gaining the perception that you actually are not a dysfunctional front office, that you actually do listen to your players, that maybe you might try to find a better plane for the players to travel on. Because, the White Sox have always been a well-downgraded franchise by most players. But doing those little things can actually help you in the long run by, treating your guys right, starting that type of trend that, hey, we're going to treat this guy well. He's got a family situation. He wants to stay in Chicago. We still need him. Okay. So I don't know if that'll happen. And again, I think Talkman is the perfect either a 4th outfielder, because you can't hurt to have his leadership in the clubhouse. Or again, if his legs are better and he can survive at least for the first 3 months until hopefully Brandon Montgomery is ready to debut in July, because that would probably be the soonest, then yeah, I say bring him back, tender him. But as I discussed on yesterday's show, there might be some financial situations of why the White Sox might want to still save a little bit of money to have the most max budget space to make a run at, Munetake Murakami, or, maybe try to sign a starting pitcher in that $7 to $10 million range on a 1-year deal. And speaking of offseason priority, I asked you what that should be, what the top priority should be. And in terms of the response, 41% said relief pitching should be the top priority. 31% said starting pitching, 25% first base or DH upgrade, and 3% said utility infielder. And again, I did a show a couple days ago about why I still think it's starting pitching over relief pitching, as again, you need somebody to just eat the innings to begin with. Now, you don't want Chris Flexen eating your innings like they did in 2024, but if you could get a better version of, say, Adrian Hauser, and maybe then another Adrian Hauser type pitcher, or even Martin Perez, I think that's going to help the White Sox next year because, first of all, it'll give them a chance to, again, be in more games because, again, the White Sox did not get blown out much this season. You want to be continuing that trend of you're in those battles and start to move past that. You're actually doing more of the blowing out than they did. I mean, because I think they were still under 500 in games decided by five or more runs. But that's why I just think starting pitching is more of a priority. But they do need to improve the high leverage bullpen arms. And that's why I agree with you that, hey, an exception should be made for this offseason to spend a little bit on some more bullpen arms. I mean, Cam Boozer and Tyler Gilbert cannot be, and Bryce Wilson cannot be your main moves. They should not be your main moves in terms of bringing in talent from outside the organization and veteran talent. I mean, I've got no problem with them bringing in maybe 2 or 3 veteran arms again. But again, they should be a little bit better than those 3 guys. You can spend a 1-year, $5 million deal, for example. I'm not talking about when they, signed those pitcher, the relief pitchers that they did in the previous rebuild. That's bad. Do not give somebody 2 or 3 years ever, in my opinion, unless it's an elite closer. Otherwise, keep developing your own bullpen arms. But at the same point, this is a good time to make an exception because, again, you can always trade those guys at the trade deadline because contenders are always looking for bullpen help. And then in the tightest vote of the week, if you had to choose, if you're a anti-Cubs but also an anti-Wisconsin sports team, who are you rooting against more than? And 36% said the Cubs, 32% said the Brewers, and I did give you the option to say the Packers stink, and that was 32%. So obviously, that was kind of the option if you just didn't want to choose between either. You were neutral. So really, it's the fan base kind of the voting is 1/3 anti-Cubs, 1/3 anti-Brewers, 1/3 I don't want to make the decision. So I'll just still say Packers stink. I don't like the Packers. And I am not opposed to you not liking the Packers. That's a good. I don't like the Packers either. But it's really hard for me because, again, in my background, to push for the Cubs when they're facing the Brewers. But even then, I'm still getting the flack. I'm like, hey, the White Sox stink from a couple of my buddies. I'm like, the White Sox aren't even involved. I'm not talking smack from a White Sox perspective. And that was the other thing I remember in 2003, just eating all that Cubs garbage because the White Sox only won 86 games and didn't make the playoffs, but the Cubs did and then won a playoff series. And I want to be like, the White Sox won the season series that year against the Cubs. I was at one of the games. The Cubs just happened to be in a weaker division. That's how they got in. It's been hard to move on. Although, again, like I said, Anthony Rizzo was he's a great human being. And even the brief interaction I had with him, I mean, again, he did not have to stop after losing a game. It was Cubs-Brewers. He did not have to stop. He could have just kept walking to get his cab. Instead, he stops and he talks to both of my nephews. And he talked to them for about 5-10 minutes. And that was really cool because, again, my nephew had just lost his mom to cancer a year before. And he had a surgery on his wrist. And it was just kind of a rough point. And there's Anthony Rizzo just talking, asking him what's going on. So that's why I don't have as much animosity towards the Scrubs, but man, this run getting me back in that animosity factor there. Well, anyways, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night until World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or listen to your podcast. I'll be back Monday to discuss how some of the White Sox prospects did in the first week of the Arizona Fall League. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion on the episode page on YouTube via email, lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or you can leave them at X, formerly Twitter, @LockedOnSox or @ToddJDub. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube or leave a 5-star review at wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you Monday.